Disco-red lights strobe-timed into every corridor. Alarms blared as the scanners verified what seemed unimaginable. A human warship had penetrated the heavily fortified border. Officers sprinted back and forth between consoles, disbelief written all over their faces. Now the most feared nightmare of the enemy was there before it, on its own doorstep. Dread rose all across the galaxy. The sight of human warships inspired fear. Stories told how such vessels, weaponized with shrewd tactics and daunting firepower, had humbled enemies several times their size. Now, an interloper of that storied lineage had broken through the Empire's closely manicured borders, puncturing the illusion of sure and absolute security. Tactical screens in their vaulted command chambers showed the warship's brazen path. Junior officers argued about whether to immediately intercept or wait for reinforcements to arrive. But deep down a dread inched with each second. They all knew the price of confronting a human ship too quickly. Nobody wanted to risk their best ships following such an ambush, having their vessels turned to atoms in moments. Top advisors, dour in demeanor, studied accounts of battles that had marked humanity's past victories. This was a lesson learned on the battlefield. That human generals changed the course of war with daring gambits and precise strikes. There were reports of entire regiments becoming kindling under heavy railgun bombardments, or advanced stealth modules that would dupe entire fleets. Built in that time, to underestimate a single human warship would be to invite annihilation. In the hallways, nervous whispers went around about the vessel's rumored capabilities. Some said it had a weapon capable of breaching shield matrices in a single volley. Others contended it could unleash drone swarms to incapacitate an entire sector's defenses simultaneously. Rumor reached through the fire like a raging firebrand, igniting the embers of terror in every echelon. In an emergency council, the admirals bickered about whether to plunge into confrontation with the threat. One camp of opinion urged an aggressive pincer move, counting on defeat of the warship's defenses before it was able to retaliate. A second faction urged a more gradual approach, deploying decoys to learn more about the intruder's weaponry before launching a commitment. The standoff said it all. They were both so terrified they could not figure out which way would cause the least catastrophic damage. Observers in far-flung outposts looked on, breath held, as the warship again cut through border patrols with clinical ease. Automated defense stations scrambled to target its drive signature, but the craft evasively danced between detection nets with an uncanny grace. Each second that ticked by without a decisive countermeasure made the Empire's vulnerability glare all the brighter. It was as if their once proud border had become flimsy, a thin curtain against a howling, overpowering wind. Farther back in the fleet's data archives, specialists discovered fragments suggesting that advanced propulsion systems were installed on the human vessel. They posited that it was possible that something generating warp corridors not detectable by normal science, impossible to follow. If true, the warship could show up anywhere, strike, and then vanish before a counterstrike could muster. The idea of battling a phantom was therefore a source of popular anxiety. Some strategists theorized that the human craft was on a reconnaissance mission, practicing its reaction times and scan for weaknesses. But some feared it had a more nefarious aim. An experimental blast designed to incapacitate entire sectors in a single, unstoppable strike. Nobody was willing to give voice to the idea that the two theories could both be true, or that humanity's ambitions went far beyond mere looting. On thousands of screens and hollow displays, the silhouette of the warship dominated every perspective. The Empire's vessels began to cluster, forming a loose ring designed to contain the intruder. The skirmishes flared near the path along which the warship was due to travel, and each ended in the crushing loss of yet another patrol frigate or outpost station. Word about these failures circulated, fueling fears even among battle-tested veterans. Inside underground bunkers, the leadership inched toward mobilizing additional forces and weighed the toll. It can also deprive important sectors of a defense against mechanized core fleets. Yes, the risk of not having their back on the station was allowing the human vessel free roam to hit strategic targets. Time, however, slipped through their fingers as panic and indecision gnawed at the Empire's chain of command, and the warship continued. With growing alarm, a last directive course throughout the Empire's network of strategic systems. Intercept intruder at all costs. Quickly, fleets resettled, forming a wall of battleships, cruisers, and fighter wings in the warship's path. Crews held on to the grim hope that sheer numbers would erase the technological advantage enjoyed by the humans. Tension seeped through each channel, sparking a grim determination. As signals bounced back and forth, each new reading on the warship's power surges recorded, a consensus emerged. About the humans they were omnipresent against, tolerance would not apply, as it did for any other foe. Whole divisions prepared themselves for a clash that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Those who questioned the scope of the threat were silenced by cautionary tales and live data of skirmishes that went badly wrong. There was a dead silence on the command decks, where every officer longed for the confrontation. Even with advanced training and years of discipline, some felt a shiver run up their spines. Even the most devoted captains questioned whether they were perched on the edge of an apocalyptic war that would shape the destiny of their entire civilization. There could be no backtrack, their borders had already been sullied, and their shame wouldn't allow the human vessel to leave unscrutinized. Then came a single order that set it in motion, an urgent drive to converge on the intruder's location. The Empire's strength surged, wrapping its ships into a ring of vessels that spanned light minutes of space. They shadowed the warships, glowing engine flares through tense displays. It was the calm before the storm, a breathless interlude when strategy and fear met, and the fight for survival called for rapid, decisive measures. Inside the bowels of the human warship, the crew braced for a mission on which humanity's fate rested. This ship represented thousands upon thousands of sacrifices and man-hours of research, a last-ditch effort against an empire that had preyed on the periphery human colonies for decades. Each console throbbed with energy. Every corridor buzzed with resolve. Months of engineering had gone into building an advanced propulsion system, letting the ship achieve speeds that should have never been possible. The hull was surrounded by a specialized shielding array reverse-engineered from captured enemy technologies. The intricate layering promised superior energy dispersal, which rendered typical laser attacks almost moot. But the real victory was in its weapons systems. Nestled deep within the warship's armored hull was a new generation of railguns, designed to launch projectiles at near-relativistic speeds. Each shot could penetrate capital ships as if they were made of glass. Next to these cannons were gravitic disruptors that could warp space around enemy ships, leaving them with deadly blind spots in the space between weapons. Minor fighter bays on the ship housed drones programmed for autonomous strikes and infiltration. Those aboard humans who did this task knew how decisive it was. For that was their identity, given them at their creation. Humanity's spearhead, tasked with driving deep into the heart of the Empire's territory. Many remembered dark days when whole habitable worlds were wiped clean of life, their resources plundered, their peoples dispersed. This warship was a monument to that grief, a tool of vengeance polished to a deadly point. The crew knew they were outnumbered, maybe outgunned, but they continued undeterred. Their mission was simple: break through enemy lines, set fire to critical infrastructure, and rally what remained of humanity's friends. The fear of failure loomed at every station, but so did the certainty that retreat was no longer an option. The Empire had become too rash. If this strike didn't succeed, humans risked extinction. So they adopted the desperate idea, opting to take the battle to the Empire's own front yard instead of waiting for another attack. Beaming in the warship's command center were tactical updates, and one showing enemy fleets gathering around them. The crew watched as the icons multiplied, like flaring embers in the dark. They observed as the enemy mobilized, and they understood the gravity of their situation. But a defiant fire flickered in their eyes. They were done being victims. This was a last-ditch gambit, all or nothing. In the bowels of the ship, a specially trained task group prepared infiltration pods. If the warship penetrated deep into an enemy command station, these squads would swarm over it, creating havoc with synchronized strikes against its central systems. It was an insane plan, reckless. The kind of thing that could land them behind enemy lines if anything went wrong, but it was a risk humanity was willing to make. The memory of ruined colonies and shattered alliances ran through every corridor. Some had watched family die at the Empire's hands. Others had seen horrors no peace treaty could erase. These were the burdens they had to carry, to fuel them, and their fierce determination to defend whatever humanity remained crystallized into a bond of unbreakable solidarity. With every heartbeat the pledge rang out. Tens of millions never again would they kneel to oppression. The warship's chief strategist, a veteran of countless battles, examined sensor data with unrelenting intensity. The approach vector for each was computed. Then, every point of weakness in the enemy formation was exposed. Under starlight twinkling through the leaves above, the strategist ordered the main cannons to be primed. There was the thunder of charging capacitors echoing through the hull, and the crew, reading the signals, locked into battle mode. Concurrently, the engine team activated specialized drive upgrades, enhancing the aquatic speed of the warship. The hull throbbed with raw power, and the view through the windows blurred into streaks of interstellar dust. They were flying straight for the biggest concentration of enemy capital ships. No path of retreat existed. The crew's eyes steely with determination, they prepared themselves for the assault. At the same time, the warship's presence blazed across the enemy's sensors like an unstoppable beacon. The Empire's fleet had converged, intent on violence, on shredding the human interloper with its fanged ships. But inside the warship's control center, no one flinched. They had traveled this far for one reason: to continue their species. If they were to die, they would die fighting, and make sure that humanity's last stand would not be forgot across the cosmos. Shield arrays at full. Strength and weapon systems online. The warship prepared to hurl itself into the jaws of the Empire. Power levels shot up, igniting the vessel's engines into flaming torches in the void. It was a spectacle that drove home one undeniable truth: humanity was not going quietly. If the enemy sought to shatter them, they would have to contend with every fragment of human resourcefulness, determination, and unyielding rage. The instant the human warship crossed the border into the central defense perimeter, the void erupted into activity. Gouts of searing laser fire erupted from the enemy frigates, weaving a deadly net intended to ensnare and vaporize the intruder. Guided missiles dog-legged through space, each warhead outfitted with tracking algorithms hellbent on overcoming an evasive curve. The Empire unleashed its fury. Across the warship's bridge, tactical displays blossomed with alerts. The pilot at their helm dodged swaths of energy bolts with elegant sweeps, dancing around dangerous volleys with precision. Inside, the crew caught Jared shakes as near-miss explosions rocked the shields. Panels over the deck flickered, but the shield generators were holding, scattering energy across wall after wall of layered defenses. When the ship shot back, it was with stunning accuracy. The primary railguns fired tungsten slugs at relativistic speeds, each impact reverberating through the cosmos. Enemy cruisers, large and armed to the teeth, were ripped like foil. One by one, the Empire's forward vessels detonated into puffs of flame and debris, peppering the battlefield with twisted metal. Fighter wings swooped in on the warship in a harrying formation, hit it with concentrated volleys. But the intruder's point defense turrets rotated in a choreographed ballet, carving brilliant lines through space. One by one, missiles and bombs wiped the attacking fighters from the sky, leaving smoking wrecks to drift through the dark. Pilots of the aliens tried new strategies, only to have their efforts countered at every juncture by the unbending attentiveness of the warship. In the midst of this chaos, a DP Fleet corvette detachment rushed at the human vessel at intense velocity, with the intention of bringing its broadside in line. Their cannons pummeled the warship's shields, probing for weaknesses. But the warship's disruptors surged to life, bending gravity around the assailants and throwing their formation into chaos. Corvettes suddenly crashed into each other, their hulls crumpling under just unimaginable forces. It was a savage exhibition of tactical dominance. Aboard the Empire's flagship, senior officers looked on in horror as their well-planned assault disintegrated. Defensive lasers dotted the chitin walls, but none were able to track the warship's motions. Big sections of their armada drifted lifeless, eviscerated by the human ship's railguns. The lines of communications exploded with frantic calls for reinforcements. Fear prevailed, but the pride of the Empire forbade them to falter. Responding quickly, The flagship's commander demanded the dispatch of heavy artillery cruisers. These hulks lumbered forward from the back lines, unleashing supercharged beams that could turn asteroids into slag. A series of shellings pounded the warship's shields, cracking them in spots. Small arcs of electricity flickered across the hull of the intruder. Detecting the threat, the human crew redirected power from secondary systems to strengthen vital parts of the shielding array. But even as damage alarms sounded, the human warship did not stop. It shifted into a prime attacking position and fired a barrage of munitions. One artillery cruiser was struck directly to its reactor core, detonating in a magnificent fireball that set nearby vessels ablaze. The warship plowed on through the searing flames, unrelenting. With every enemy craft destroyed, humanity gained another step closer to redemption. And the battlefield was a graveyard of junk and funeral pyres. Nevertheless, the Empire committed additional resources to the fight. Bombers streamed along in a desperate run, hoping to disable the warship's propulsion. They swooped down in a dense formation, engines screaming. But just as they were set to drop their payloads, another threat arose. The human warship set its swarm of autonomous drones loose, tiny, deadly crafts that flew in streaks with unerring coordination. These drones ripped into the bombers, shredding their wings and engines with pulsed plasma bursts. Once in flight, some bombers exploded, showering their comrades below with molten rubble. Others careened off into space, powerless, until burned away by errant laser fire. The Empire could do nothing but watch as more of its assets were blasted into oblivion by the warship's unstoppable arsenal. As the battle roiled, the pilot of the warship spotted an opening in the thick lines of opposition. The shields were still at partial strength, but that didn't matter. The ship powered forward, determined not to lose its momentum. A whole frigate squadron tried to make a last-minute intercept. Together, their assault hammered at the flank of the warship, shaking its interior. Lights flashed and conduits fizzed and popped under the pressure. An instant later, the warship released precise pulses of energy from each railgun, frying the frigates to molten slag. Shrapnel and twisted metal fell into the void. The Empire's ranks trembled and writhed from the punishing losses streaming in. In this maelstrom of shattered hulls and blinding explosions, the warship loomed, a titan seeking vengeance, unbroken, irrepressible. The bloodshed was unprecedented in the Empire. Timid delusions of supremacy collapsed before such unsparing power. They were master manipulators, to be sure, but they had picked the wrong target at the wrong time, as the realization at some point crystallized for one enemy captain after another. All their careful plans meant nothing in the face of the desperate fury of a human ship. The Empire's tactics, once viewed as polished and time-tested, melted before a force motivated by desperation and powered by an indomitable spirit. This initial engagement, arranged to turn back the human warship at once, became instead a monument to humanity's iron determination. The Empire's leaders exchanged urgent transmissions over secure channels. The perimeter was in ruins. The warship still rolled on. Their biggest guns couldn't stop it. Reinforcements were being rushed, but that might take too long. Now, the unthinkable had come to pass. The invader had breached their perimeter, and fear gripped every last corner of the Empire's once majestic military. With losses mounting and chaos on all sides, the Empire's fleet had assembled for a counterstrike the likes of which had never been attempted. Lethal high command-sanctioned deployment of prototype arms, experimental warheads said to destabilize space-time itself. Crews choked back excitement and terror as they armed devices that had never been used in a real battle. Throughout countless star systems, the Empire's admirals turned their ships to assemble at a singular coordinate. The plan was audacious. Draw the human warship into a supposedly unsecured area and then converge on it from every direction. This would be the largest ambush formation ever in the Empire's history. If it succeeded, it would crush the intruder between bands of lethal firepower. If it did fail, the consequences would be unthinkable. Tactically using feints and false transmissions, the Empire's ships started to channel the human warship away from populated areas. Smaller fleets peeled away, projecting images of retreat, trying to lure the interloper in deeper before springing a trap. while the Empire's finest tacticians scrambled to calculate the warship's trajectory, continuously refinishing their formation to envelop it at the ideal moment. Sensitive to threat, the human warship sensors scanned each dimension, picking up on unusual fleet activity. Pockets of resistance fell back, as if calling it on. The crew of the warship, suspicious, analyzed the data for anomalies. But, driven by the urgency of their mission, they pressed bravely onward. Their goal was deeper in enemy territory, and turning around now would risk losing the element of surprise. Caution battled against necessity. Soon the battlefield moved to a sector full of astral junk. Wrecked boats and shattered moons drifted like tombstones. Cover turned to hazard. The Empire's noose started to tighten. From behind shattered asteroids, concealed fleets roared to life, scrambling to surround the warship. A dozen battleships sprang up in concerted arcs, forming a broad ring of concentrated firepower. Initially, the warship's forward scouts detected only faint energy signatures. And then everything blew up all at once. Storms of hundreds of beams of ion fire, missile barrages, and kinetic projectiles swept in from all sides. Urgent brilliance flared through the warship's shields as they battered under the focused fire. Inside, the crew prepared for impact as collision alarms shrieked and compartments rattled from punishing collisions. For the first time, the warship's armor shattered in sections. Sparks erupted from overloaded consoles. Emergency bulkheads crashed shut to contain jettisoned atmosphere. The pilot struggled to steady the vessel as power surges threatened to send critical systems offline. The ambush had worked, at least up to a point. The warship was caught in a crossfire that no individual vessel could survive without relief. But even when cornered, humanity would not give in. The warship's main battery roared in return, shredding an enemy carrier in moments. Drone bays released waves of cybernetic fighters, all indoctrinated for maximum ruthlessness. They plunged at the surrounding ships, sabotaging weapon emplacements, tearing through docking bays. In some sectors, the Empire's ship formations broke apart, roiled by the relentless counterattack. Detecting a narrow window to avoid the collision, the warship's helm executed a desperate maneuver. As its engine's parameters pushed toward the red, it barreled into the densest grouping of enemy ships. The abrupt dive made some hesitate to avoid collision, while others scrambled to achieve firing solutions. The warship wove between the smoldering hulks, railguns spitting destruction. A number of cruisers fell within seconds, their hulls rent asunder by kinetic fury. Nevertheless, the Empire persisted with its plan. Reinforcements flooded in over concealed flanks, forming layer upon layer of blockade. One bludgeoned the warship after another, hungry to drown its faltering shields. Above the bedlam, bombers equipped with the prototype warheads drew near. All they had to do was something simple and terrifying. Create a distortion field that could tear space-time apart around the warship, leaving it open to a finishing blow. While above decks, key systems struggled to stay functional against the relentless assault. Backup generators churned to life, but every jolt could spiral into catastrophic damage. Medical bays overflowing with wounded crew, each casualty pushing the warship's hatred for the enemy further and further. The infiltration teams preparing for a possible boarding operation sat in tense silence, having no idea if the hull could take such brutal punishment. And then, the Empire executed a cunning stratagem. Several capital ships had focused LD beams on key coordinates about the warship, pinning it into a narrow lane. Instead, at precise intervals, specialized frigates deployed containment nets, fields that were meant to lock the warship's position in place, even if only temporarily. 1 second of stillness could cost someone their life. Frozen in the dead net pulses and crippled by the weapon's fire, the human warship started to slow. The bombers were heavy with experimental warheads. The sensors tracked them in. The crew understood the dire shape they were in. They'd been enticed into the jaws of the Empire's largest military, and now, catastrophic annihilation was at hand. Above them, the bombers stood poised to drop their reality-warping payloads. But then came a sudden twist. Allied signals, long silent in the region, blared across the warship's communications. Scattered cells of resistance, hiding for cycles, had sensed the chaos of battle. Looking to take revenge on the Empire, they staged a surprise raid on the rear lines of the encircling forces. Chaos cascaded through the empires founding as outposts were attacked, supply routes sabotaged. At that decisive moment, the concentration of the empire faltered. The net pulses flashed, leaving room for the warship, which surged ahead. Its pilot took advantage, launching the vessel from the path of the prototype bombs. Dazed bombers let their payloads fly in an uncontrolled volley, bending space around the warship. Instead of behind it, wide rifts sparkled as they engulfed Empire vessels trapped in the distortion. Frigates and battleships alike disappeared into the writhing void. The trap had sprung on its masters. In the resulting chaos, the warship freed itself from the tightening noose, though it bore deep scars. The Empire had paid a heavy price for its desperate gamble, but humanity's greatest hope was free to continue the battle, forging a path between the two largest armies in the universe that would ultimately lead to the final confrontation. Ripping through the shredded remnants of the enemy's blockade, the human warship plowed toward the Empire's command nexus, a gargantuan fortress laced with massive, ship-splitting cannons and fighter bays. This installation was at the heart of the Empire's military power, festooned with defenses said to be invulnerable. If the warship could eliminate the nexus, it would cripple the Empire's entire war machine. As the warship's hull cracked and its systems battered, crews pressed ahead. Sparks poured down from overhead conduits, and critical readouts flickered and failed. But morale soared because they knew that the resistance cells scattered across the country had joined their efforts. Despite its battering, the warship held hope for every man-made colony in search of freedom. Alarms blared as the fortress acquired the approaching vessel. Planetary-scale lasers activated and columns of missile silos slid open. Scores of elite fighters swarmed out from the fortress's docking bays, forming a living shield around the station. As the targeting beams converged on the intruder, the whole sector glowed red. Still, the warship advanced. Its forward batteries came to life with a roar, spewing a barrage that vaporized the initial wave of defenders. Railgun slugs tore through fighter formations, distorting hulls and snuffing engine trails. Even the fortress's cannons struggled to keep up with the intruder's erratic movements, each shot ripping molten brands into nearby dead rocks. Some were taken, but in a simultaneous strike, the fortress sent up all the ships it had available. Swarms of interceptors pounded the warship from multiple directions. Others discovered weak spots in the shattered armor plating and raked it with punishing blows. Systems after systems showed critical levels on onboard screens. Drone complements from the warship scrambled to intercept, colliding in explosive bursts of plasma and metal. The casualties piled up, but both sides did not back down. As the warship approached the fortress, the infiltration teams unleashed their assault. The specialized pods had been shot from concealed launch tubes, insets in the hull of the fortress, and shot toward open ports on the exterior. Protected by fire from the warship's turrets, these pods broke through the outer defenses. Almost immediately afterward, the fortress's sensors recorded several hull breaches. Alarm klaxons blared throughout every deck. Within the fortress's inner sanctum, the infiltration squads wreaked havoc. They disabled shield generators and weapon grids by sabotaging power conduits. Whole sections of the fortress went dark. Elite Empire troops responded, but the squads moved with rehearsed precision, setting explosives at key junctions and then vanishing into the next hall. In space again, the warship exploited the mounting confusion. It focused the rest of its firepower on the main reactor interface of the fortress. If that core failed, the whole system would be crippled. The fortress cannons spat beams of focused energy that brushed against the warship's shields and made the energy field glow brighter around its bruised shell. Each near miss threatened to punch through, but the pilot pressed the attack, weaving madly among streaks of scorching light. Then came the deep rumble of a massive explosion from inside the fortress, a sign that the sabotage teams had been successful. Shield projectors on the fortress's eastern flank fell dark, creating a crucial opening. The warship diverted all power to weapons and sent a parting shot of railgun rounds into the exposed reactor housing. The hits echoed home with earth-shaking power, and a chain reaction ripped through the spine of the fortress. Chunks of the structure exploded outward, sending debris flying and damaging fuel lines. Secondary explosions roared through the station, destroying entire wings of the fortress. In seconds, the blackened command nexus wheezed flame and gas, impotent before the inevitable onslaught. Those fighters still engaged outside staggered, their command chain in disarray. In a single gout of destruction, the fortress's central core ruptured, turning the star-speckled theater into an incandescent inferno. The shockwave bounced around the area as it crippled any vessel in the blast zone. Even the human warship, farther behind and out in the branching, felt the violent shudder as the chunks of the Empire's jewels flew past. A silence reigned over the comm channels as the fortress imploded. Tens of thousands of Empire ships, suddenly leaderless, began a mad scramble to retreat. Some sought to regroup, but the turning blow had landed. Communications within the Empire became increasingly chaotic, with fleets receiving conflicting orders or falling silent altogether. The core of their strategic machinery was missing. The warship regrouped with surviving resistance cells, seizing the initiative. They had done the impossible, despite suffering heavy losses. The Empire's central command nexus lay in ruins. Flickers of hope took root across the sector. Although parts of the Empire resistance remained strong, it shattered their sense of invincibility and sent a ripple of losing panic through the ranks. There were cheers, albeit tempered by sobs for fallen comrades, within the human warship. Wounded, low on supplies and with untold repairs to come, the crew nevertheless felt a wave of relief. They had overcome overpowering odds and dealt a deadly blow. Now with the Empire's fleets scrambling to make sense of their defeat, humanity was in an opening to fortify its foothold and move ahead. The Empire woke up to the nightmare come true. Their invincible stronghold lay in shambles, defeated by a single human battleship and a few troublesome friends. The chain of command had frayed, and the erstwhile faultless defenses lay in tatters. An undercurrent of fear ran through the surviving officers, who wondered whether any haven would be spared from humanity's revenge. The area where the mighty fortress once stood fell silent. Scattered, glinting wreckage caught weak starlight, a grim testament to a warship's capacity for destruction and the steely resolve of people who would not be enslaved. Waving tendrils of smoke drifted from crippled hulls, and the flickering lights of exploded vessels suggested injured survivors fighting to live in the void. The booming vicinity of the human warship blared throughout the burned-out battlefield like a triumphant symbol. It loomed on the edges of what was left, searching for residual threats. From the command center, the pilot and tactical officers worked with scattered ships of resistance. Their communications expressed gratitude and grief in roughly equal measure. Some freedom fighters reported whole enemy divisions fleeing their posts, unwilling to test the intruders' wrath any further. In the subsequent days, ad hoc rescue efforts salvaged survivors from the rubble. Some disillusioned, wounded Empire crew surrendered instead of continuing a fight. Does not stop working. Others retreated deeper into the Empire's territory, their morale broken by the warship's unimaginable success. Regardless of how they responded, one thing was inescapably true. The Empire had been mortally wounded. Far across the galaxy, word of the fortress's fall flew at light speed. For the Empire's thousands of subjugated species, this became a catalyst for rebellion. Stations that had once knelt under tyrannical authority offered a pathway to autonomy. Whispers spread and silent revolts began to stir as speculation arose that they would soon be saved by the human warship capable of turning the tide in their favor. Hope, suppressed, returned. Back on the warship, the crew worked frantically to plug ruptures and stabilize systems. Engineers scrambled over the next hours, sealing breaches, recalibrating shield generators. Though battered, the vessel was still a deadly weapon. Faces worn with exhaustion and pride. It had cost them dearly, but the success of their mission opened the door to a broader campaign against the Empire's tyranny. After their daring inside the fortress, the infiltration teams rendezvoused with the main crew. They bore scars and tales of bravery. Each had seen the moment the lights went out on the fortress, a second when the word of the Empire seemed to fold under the weight of human will. Word of their bravery spread among the resistance cells, inspiring greater volunteerism. And in the squalls of Imperial space, the survivors of the High Command called emergency summits. They acknowledged their crisis. No leader could dispute humanity's new resume. The insatiable invader they once derided had reduced their strongest citadel to ash and humiliated their united fleets. Paranoia and fear abounded. Would we see more of these warships? Had the organs been found indivisible capabilities? And full-staffed human armadas awaited, and were rumored to wait, ready to finish the job. The planetary governors, who had once been so solidly loyal, now considered in secret all options. Some thought of surrender, hoping to negotiate terms before the warship arrived. Some called for revenge, fanning the flames of hatred against all humankind. Beneath a swirl of political uncertainty, the Empire was divided and vulnerable, just as flickering rebellions were taking hold in all corners of its territory. A new challenge loomed for the human crew. Their first victory was profound, but the war was nowhere near over. Along the communication lines, pockets of insurgents asked for help to topple local strongholds. Despite the loss of the fortress, the Empire still possessed countless fleets and powerful weapons spread across myriad star systems. The journey to liberation would be lengthy and perilous. But in that instant, as the haunted silence gave way and everything fell apart, one truth became clear. Humanity had threatened extinction and in doing so had brought down the Empire's illusory invincibility. The warship's example echoed beyond the battlefield and became a rallying cry against oppression. Through sweat and tears and the incredible bravery to fight back, humanity had etched a new mythos into the stars. And so, as the beleaguered warship gunned its engines, poised to push further into hostile waters, its very presence said everything. The Empire had learned that humanity burned bright, unbowed by the dark. One vessel had altered the trajectory of history, compelling mighty fleets to prostrate themselves or die. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. Out there, beyond the remote worlds and distant suns, the cold light of realization dawned on those who still resisted the will of humankind. If one warship could cast such an unfathomable shadow, what horrors might flow in its wake? The Empire's terror had only just begun, and in the soundless void, a singular promise echoed throughout the stars. Humanity would emerge, and no empire would hinder its progress.